told I thought it was. Yeah.
All right. Sorry. Which is 10 no relevant? Which is then not relevant. Oh, then not relevant. Typing error. Given the direct relationship that is proposed between the council and the XLL, for further work being undertaken to identify the most cost-effective way of delivering the service in the future and to identify any additional costs in 2022-23 and in future years. So I'm proposing that recommendation. Could I have a seconder, please? Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry about that, mate. Over to you.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Yeah, following those catchy recommendations, which I think most people recognise have been written by the lawyers, just to quickly cover off this report, as it says, basically the Home Pierpont Leisure Trust arrangements are struggling to be sustainable following 2 years of heavy floods on the site and the COVID pandemic. We've been discussing with the Trust over the last 18 months or so the voluntary ending of that contractual arrangement and a direct relationship with Serco. The contract allows for that to happen. We will lose some financial benefits associated with the Trust model, which is a not-for-profit model, particularly around business rates and VAT. The intention is to move to this direct contractual arrangement as soon as possible, including Tupri and Over staff who are currently employed by the Leisure Trust into Serco. The intention would then to be look at other cost-effective models to try and minimise any future costs associated with this to try and end up with a revised operating model which maximises the financial benefits from 22-23 onwards. There are some short-term costs identified within the report, as well as some potential long-term costs if we're unable to realise that further operating change. Members are asked to consider the recommendations, which have some significant issues there for the council around cost and particularly having a direct contractual relationship. Obviously, myself and Derek are here to answer any questions you may have, but we propose the recommendations and hope that you're happy to move to that model, which will mitigate the trust risks and the council's risk in the long term.
Thank you very much, Mick. Do I have any members of the committee who wish to ask any questions? Thank you, Councillor Guildford.
Thank you, Chair. So basically we're asking to approve an interim model. Are you saying that? Because clearly you're saying that you're going to look at further arrangements, because what is probably best is a similar sort of trust in the sense of financially getting some of the waivers that you get on rates, etc., which assist the contract. The other one is, can you just explain what the 25k, and then I notice in the report that you're saying another 200 possibly, what that would be used for, and is there not anything that we can work with Serco on so that they actually work together with us to fund some of that? And then I was a bit concerned because obviously one of the issues is that during the last couple of years we have been subsidising clearly the financial impact of both the from the flooding and from the COVID. So in management terms, the actual trust has not really sort of, although they've had the worry about it, I mean, we've tried to relieve that worry. So I was a bit concerned, and if I could go into, if there's any more detail about why actually the trust has sort of decided to fold, because obviously that was the best arrangement for all at the time. And then the other one is about assurances that we have about effective oversight by Serco. Serco, as you know, covers a lot of areas, and they've got different sort of pasts and people's feelings about them in all sorts of fields that they're in. And one of the things, this is a public facility, and we want to make sure, I do anyway, and I'm sure the committee does, that when the public go out there, that it is a safe and secure site for them. And I wondered what assurances we've got, because obviously at the moment, we could work directly with local people who know the area, etc., etc. You'd be talking about a management structure that we're not sort of, people could come in and who do not know the area. So I just wondered what the arrangements are going to be for managing that, and how we would make sure that that place is still a safe and sound place for public to go.
Okay, yes, thank you.
I'll work backwards on those if that's okay. Serco currently operate the site anyway through a management agreement with the trust. So in effect, the operational people on the ground, the management people, Jack Garner, who's the site manager, wouldn't change. So in terms of the day-to-day operations and who does what, Serco already do that. The trust at the moment sits between the county council and Serco as the contracting party to benefit from those tax breaks. But actually, in terms of operation, there won't be any changes. Serco's regional management, national management, and local management will stay the same. There won't be any change with that. So we won't lose that local expertise. The difference will be in terms of the employees. Individual employees are currently employed by the trust and would be employed direct by Serco. But again, in reality, the line management of those people currently runs through Jack and the team on site. So they wouldn't see any difference. They just have a different name on the pay slips. So in terms of day-to-day operations, there'd be no change. What would change for us is a direct relationship with Serco, because at the moment we deal with Serco on a day-to-day basis. So we deal with Jack and the team anyway, and the trust sits in the background. But there are a number of decisions that the trust need to make and management arrangement that the trust have, which can be quite challenging, and particularly with the potential financial risks associated with COVID and with the flooding. The trust, as non-professionals, I guess, have found some of that quite difficult, and decision making has been relatively slow in a number of ways. So by having that direct relationship with Serco, we'll be able to make decisions quicker, because the people that are delivering on the ground will be answering direct to us as the client from the county council rather than through the trust. The trust have done a really good job, and as you say, we have subsidised. We've met some of the costs of the, in effect, the trust and through into the operating management team anyway over the last 18 months. So you're right, absolutely, we have protected them financially from the risk, but it is a risk, and I know you know as a trustee of various bodies that, and particularly Inspire, that some of those risks can feel quite real and personal, particularly where there's significant costs associated with the site. So this will hopefully alleviate some of the difficulties of experience with decision making, where trustees may or may not be concerned about their individual liabilities. So it will provide a better solution for us on that. The costs that are indicated are in effect related to the tax benefits. So the site, particularly I think things like the campsite, etc., get substantial tax relief in terms of business rates. So the money that's allocated for this year is just a partial year of those costs if we have to meet them, and VAT, which is non-chargeable when it's run through a trust. So certain activities will be VAT-able. And we're continuing to work with Serco colleagues to try and, in effect, try and get Serco to take more of the cost, which I think is what you're alluding to, which I think is absolutely legitimate and an appropriate point for us to step into. But that is challenging. That site has faced a number of challenges over the last 2 or 3 years, certainly since Serco and the trust took over the site in 2013. Has saved substantial amounts of money for the council. I think we're running at around £900,000 to £1 million a year cost to the real cost to the council to operate the site previously. That's dropped substantially down to about 150,000-ish in a normal year, but obviously over COVID that again has increased, as you would expect, as a lot of facilities. The change here is a permanent one because that's the only way we can change the contract in effect. So it is a permanent change to a direct relationship, but the intention is to move to another relationship which maximises those tax benefits down the line. And we're currently talking to Serco and obviously our own internal and external legal experts and commercial experts to try and find the best balance between the council's ability to manage the site effectively with the operator, but also benefit from whatever financial incentives and/or tax breaks we can get, which obviously again is beneficial for the taxpayer of Nottinghamshire. Have to bear in mind though, one of the key things here is about making sure that site stays open, that it remains available to the public to use in the long term. They do have a number of elite sport clients who generate income for the site, but a lot of the day-to-day users, so the people who are just using the green space, and particularly during COVID, the only income from that is car parking, which has been negligible really in a lot of ways. The actual main income from the site comes from events, sporting events that are held on the lake that generate income through the actual the campsite or the hotel or whatever else, and they've obviously and the hospitality elements of that, and they've been unavailable for long periods of time over the last 18 months, 2 years now. So the model is a permanent one, but we'll look to tweak that through a further report to committee as necessary if we can find a better way of doing it. But this alleviates the risk, and as we go into the winter period, obviously the risk is greater again because they don't have the income running through the site. And unfortunately, we are going to get some bad weather again. Hopefully, not as bad as we've had over the last 2 or 3 winters. But the site doesn't self-finance through the winter period, unfortunately. Okay.
Thank you, Mick. Thank you, Glenn. Yes, Councillor Barnfather. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Allen, for that background. I'm aware that when the administration in 2013 adopted this model, that as you've already pointed out, the home pier pont itself was costing this authority close on £1 million. And I think we should recognise that the trustees have actually done an excellent job since 2013, and it's through no fault of theirs that the current circumstances with the pandemic has effectively has severely impacted on their operating model. And I have to say I totally understand why they would want to step away from the potential financial risks that are associated with remaining a trustee in these very trying times. Home Pier Pont is a significant jewel in the crown of Nottinghamshire County Council, underused as a country park, well used by elite sports and more amateur sports people as a national water sports centre. I think this is an opportunity to refresh the offer. It's quite right that we should make every effort as an authority to maintain the site and improve the marketing of the site as we move forward. And you're right, we should be looking, I think Councillor Guilfoyle made that point, that we should be looking in the future to try and move back to that tax efficient model. But as an interim measure, and I understand why it has to be a permanent measure for legal purposes, but effectively as an interim measure, at the moment, this authority needs to take back on responsibility of the site. So I welcome the paper, I welcome the recommendations that are before us, and hopefully there's still a bright future for the site as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Anybody else? Yeah, Councillor Wheeler. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to echo some of Councillor Barnfather's points. In the country park, it's very close to my division, and being around there a few times myself, it is a fantastic facility. I do think one of the big points we need to make clear to Serco is about making sure that wider community do know about the facility there, that it's not just for elite athletes, it's a country park, it's a great place to go around the whole site. You've got the Skylarks Nature Reserve literally opposite as well, because as Chris said, it's a jewel in the crown. We need to make sure many people are going there enjoying it, and make sure that's part of the new arrangements going forward, so that work is done to showcase basically all the great facilities there. I mean, if you tell you about the climb frames and mini golf, the various other activities you can do, it's a great day out for families, as well as taking the dog for a walk or a nice day out during the summer. So you make sure people are aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Williamson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions really around some of the longer term financial implications in this. Obviously, I know the figure of 25,000 for 2021, 2022, and a currently estimated potential cost of £200,000. In terms of this, obviously, over the last year or so, I believe Serco have been awarded 2 bands of money, public taxpayer funded money. I believe it was about around £700,000 last June and around £300,000 in November. Obviously, whilst I accept that some of these costs are needed through COVID and various other issues, that's £1 million of public money that has now gone to a company over the last year that is, you know, it's a private company. They run services for profit. Having given £1 million to them over the last year, I just worry what the potential longer term financial impacts are. This obviously in paragraph 17 under operational and financial impacts, and again under financial comments in paragraph 28, it mentions that any additional costs in future years are going to have to be met through the budget of this committee. Do we have any idea what sort of figures we're talking in terms of these budgets? Obviously, I appreciate we need to provide support, but I also don't want us to become a bit of an open checkbook, if you will. I do want to predicate all that by saying I do support Home Pier Point. I think it's a fantastic facility, but I need to have some assurances around the longer term financial impacts here.
Thank you for the question. I'm handing over to Mick for the answer.
That's fine. Thank you for that, and I understand those concerns. And Councillor Barnfather mentioned about the risk of the financial risk associated with being a trustee. I think that's perceived risk rather than a real risk. But I think it's important to say that the money at the moment, the money that was paid out through COVID, and it's COVID grant that's come into the authority, so it's not council money as such, it is direct COVID grant, has been to the trust, for the trust then to pay Serco to provide the service. So it doesn't go to Serco direct from the county council at this point. That money didn't. But we've got to bear in mind that the site was costing around £1 million a year to operate when it was directly run by us. You're absolutely right. We've had to subsidise that and support that over the last 18 months because of COVID, because of the complete lack of income. It's the income that offsets all of the operating costs. So the income that's been generated, the reason that it's cheaper, in effect, for the council to operate now than it was before is because Serco and the trust have grown the income substantially over the last 7 or 8 years, until the last 2 years or so when things have been very difficult for obviously flooding reasons and then COVID. The indication at the moment is that the tax implications, and the £200,000 is purely the tax implications. The operating costs for Serco wouldn't be any different to the operating costs for the trust, because at the moment the trust sits in the middle as a not-for-profit organisation. So the payment mechanism and the contractual arrangements will be the same in effect, but it will be a direct contract with Serco rather than through the trust. So the additional costs that we've met over the last 2 years, which are absolutely related to flooding and COVID, I can't promise you that COVID has now gone away permanently, and I certainly can't promise you that we won't have any more flooding over the next year or two. We hope not, but I can't. So clearly, if that impacts and that takes away that revenue stream, then the costs might have to be met, because it may be the situation that we find ourselves in order to keep the site operational and keep it viable. But contractually, the additional costs associated with this have been highlighted are additional costs related to the lost tax benefits, not additional payments to Serco. So HMT will be taking the money, not Serco, because it's tax costs.
Thanks, Mick. I think also, while you were saying direct payments to Serco, it wasn't, but we also had furloughing of staff, which was involved there, and they're local people who live locally and work locally. So I think I'm right in that, and it's a bit wider than just giving Serco some money. And obviously, when they open up again, the staff are there to work. So I think that's that part of this as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point, that obviously it is local people that work there, and Serco have protected their employment, working with the trust to do that over that last 18 months or so. And I think that's really important because many of the staff who work on the site work limited hours because of the nature of it, seasonal, and they've had their employment protected through those arrangements. And the county council meeting some of those costs, although it's regrettable because none of us want to pay more than we normally do for the site, given the exceptional circumstances that have happened nationally. I think for the site to continue to be operational, to continue to be accessible, particularly around the green spaces, has been a really good job through the trust and Serco to keep that working through what's been a really tough time across the whole leisure sector. And we're in a good place to move forward, but we are still at the mercy of the virus and the weather, unfortunately.
Thanks, Mick. Thank you, Daniel. Okay, any other members wish to speak? Sorry, Pauline, I wasn't ignoring you.
As someone who's a layperson who is very familiar with Home Pierpont, I just have to point out that already the customer base is growing and there are people there, and to point out there are many things that you have you have that there to be used, the racing and on the big lake, but also the small, I do know what it's called, but I'm getting old. I've forgotten. But it has more to offer. And it is one of these things where you have to invest the money and not lose it and have it there for people to use. I won't say and hope it progresses, because it does. And it's already growing its customer base in recent weeks when it's not yet fully fledged and going. So I'm a big supporter of it. Thank you. Except when they have Saturday night parties after a win and keep me away.
Are you invited? Are you invited? Yeah. Thank you for those comments, Pauline. Okay, right, we'll move to the vote then, please. All those in favour of the recommendations, please show. It's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much. Right, the next item is item 5, the Local Communities Fund. Mark, would you like to introduce? Oh, no, I've got to do the recommendation. I was just about to get told. I'm sorry. Number 1 on the recommendation on page 18 is the Local Communities Fund scheme proposals include the names, timescales and features as set out in the report. Number 2, the launch of the Local Communities Fund, including a talented athletes element for 2021-22 based on the timetable at paragraph 20 of the report. Well, item 3 of the recommendations, the increase in allocation of funding for talented athletes programme to £50,000 for this financial year. So I will propose that and would ask for a seconder. Okay, thank you.
Happy to second that, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And I'll go over to you, Mark, please. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Chair. The last recommendation there should talk about paragraph 22, the timetable in 22 rather than 20. I've just spotted there's a little error there. So this is the first of 3 papers that I'll be introducing to our committee today, and this is regarding the development of the discretionary funding scheme to succeed the current local improvement scheme. The paper builds on decisions taken by this committee in June, and it proposes that a new scheme is called the Local Communities Fund. And this fund would be made up of 3 proposed programmes. 1, a revenue programme with a large and small grants element to it. Secondly, a capital programme. And then finally, and thirdly, the talented athletes programme. So the key changes from the local improvement scheme really are that for the revenue scheme, there'll be a 4-year funding element for larger grants, but then there'll be a rolling small grants element through the 4 years. Regarding the capital scheme, that would move to a rolling programme rather than a once-a-year scheme as under the local improvement scheme. And then for the talented athletes programme, it'd be an expanded programme in terms of both finances and also in terms of the reach to those athletes who face the greatest challenge, whether they be physical, financial or in any other way. And then finally, the paper sets out the proposed timetable for the new scheme, but with a view to bringing the first committee approvals, the first approvals for committee to take in March 2022, following the budget for the authority obviously having been set in February. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Williamson. Daniel, is it? Yeah, you.
I think you probably know what I'm going to ask about paragraph 18. Applicants can apply for up to a maximum of 20,000 and will be expected to have guaranteed match funding. I did raise this in the previous meeting. It's something that I really felt needed looking at. Why have we kept the match funding? I made the point back in June, and I do reiterate it now, that forcing people to guarantee to have the match fund is going to disenfranchise a lot of very small groups and a lot of well-meaning community interests and people that want to do fantastic things, but they're simply going to be disqualified from the process through having no money of their own. Is it necessary to have the match funding? I think if there's a relevant programme, something that's worthy of this fund, then we should be supporting people in that, surely, not saying, oh, sorry, you can't do this because it's going to cost 20,000 and you can't put 10,000 in. It's just a point I want to reiterate from June and seek to understand why we still feel the need to have match funding.
Do you want to come back on that, Mark? And then I'll add on if I feel that there's something from my point of view. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Obviously, we've been thinking long and hard about the programme and developing it. The reason for the match funding is clearly there's a limited amount of money in the budget, and by putting a match funding requirement in, it means that we can stretch the money further and hopefully support more and more, worthy programmes and projects. If there's no match funding requirement, obviously the money won't go as far.
And I would add that we thought long and hard over it, and that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that it's a capital grant, and any group or person doing fundraising for a project can go to other funders as well to bring in money. So we can spread more money around, or we can kickstart things by saying, yes, we will put our money in, and you go off to somebody else to find that out. And I'm looking at the lottery, Sport England, and there are other organisations out there that support sports or organisations or whatever it is you're doing. There is something out there. You won't always get accepted for it, but we wanted to spread it as far and wide as possible. And I don't think it's a case of what you've got in your pocket, because I do understand the sentiment you're making, but we want to bring in more money. We've spent a long time in my community raising some funds for sports ground, and we raised a lot of money locally, but we went to other bodies to cap off £1 million project. And that is by going to different funders, not just one other funder as well. So I think there are opportunities for people, and the officers at County Hall would help anybody trying to do a project. If we accept it, we could guide them, give them support to go and get what they're trying to achieve. So it's one of those, you can't win for winning, if you know what I mean. But if we can get £1 million of our funding to bring in £4 or £5 million from somewhere else, then we've achieved even more for the community of Nottinghamshire. So that was the way I've seen it. So I accept what you're saying, but actually, if we find out we're doing it all wrong, then I'll look at it again. I hope you're okay with that answer.
Yeah, the answer. I do appreciate the point you've making and the reasoning. I just wanted to strongly make the point that I do feel it disenfranchises some groups.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Guilford.
Yeah, a couple of questions. Just on the match funding, I accept what you say, but there are, as you say, there are some organisations and there are some areas that aren't very affluent and do find it difficult, whether, to raise that money. You're saying, as a group of individuals, you've been able to. There are some areas that just don't have that wherewithal to be able to do that. So I'm happy that what you're saying is that officers will help organisations that come forward to find other funding as well, which leads me to the question of, in the sense of staffing, because clearly the officers within the communities division have been working very hard and want some real applause for the work that they've been doing during the period of COVID, and they've been working on grants and they've had to turn them around very quickly, and that takes a lot of work, and there's only a small number of staff, and they've done that marvellously. That work is still ongoing, as you know, because obviously there's funds mentioned later on in the report that we're still working with, but also this is a new regime of funds. Have we enough staff in there to be able to do justice to the support that the public out there would need? That's my first question, John, because my personal opinion is I think they do need probably some assistance in there to get by with that. The second one is about obviously the 3 strands, and clearly it explains that 500k is coming in for the capital, but what I really wanted to know, what is left for the major grants? Because the issue for me on major grants is that we've we know we've got a lot of CVSs out there and CAB and various others that we support, and I wondered whether that money has been inflation proofed and how much has been earmarked for that, and what's the cost, what's the current cost that we pay out on those major grants now, and is that going to be sort of future proof of inflation as we go through? Because clearly any non-inflation proof on that means that they have to make cuts, at the end of the day, which can, in particular during again during this time, they've all been very, very busy helping out the public, and I just wondered, A, what's the pot that's left for that, and B, how does that fit with what we were paying out last year, or including this year, say, and how's that inflation? I'm glad to see that we're, and fully support the 4-year term, because that, as has always been a bugbear that we've been doing it on an annual basis, and clearly that's, for the people that work in that sector, but also for the organisation to sort of plan, it makes it very difficult that every year you possibly could not get funded. So I'm really glad that we're going for a 4-year programme on that. In relation, I'm also glad in the Talented Athletes Fund where you talk about looking at the not deprivation as such, but financially challenged individuals, and I just wondered how you're going to work that out, because again, we know one of the things I know from when we looked at the charts that we asked for last time about the funding to particular areas of sports, and it was, you could see the spread. That there was sort of tennis in one area, not in another, and there were canoeing, I think, was a big one in Bassetlaw, which surprised me in one sense to a degree. But then when you think about some of the waters that are around there, I can see where that is. But I just wondered again if there's any targeting around specific sports as well, that where we know that we want to encourage people to get into a particular sport. And that in a particular area where we know that's not quite developed. Swimming's always been a big one right across the county, because we've developed that. We had a major programme of swimming right out, but there are some areas where some other sports where they're not as prevalent, if you know what I mean. So I think that's it at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Glyn. I think tennis might be very popular soon as well. Can't think why, but
yeah.
I'm going to let Mark answer.
Well, canoeing maybe, because if you know our own, one of our own councillor's daughters got gold in canoeing in the Paralympics, and trains at on Pierpoint. And congratulations to her.
Yes, Mark, I'll let you come back to Glyn on those, and I'll chip in if there's an easy bit. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So I think your first point was around the communities team and staffing in the team, etc. Yeah, I mean, obviously they have been absolutely brilliant throughout COVID. That we've taken on lots and lots of new funds, responsibilities, etc. We are in a relatively new administration. We're coming out of COVID, so we're sort of getting our heads around what the asks will be on the team going forward, and also, what the new world looks like. So I think it's something we could take away and have a look at. We're coping at the moment. And you'll see later on in a further paper on armed forces that there's some extra resource going into the team. So we need to look at it in the round and can report back on that one in terms of resource. In terms of the next point I think you were making around the finances and how much I think was going to be left for major grants going forward. We have not put a figure on that as yet. We're going to be taking the applications in. Again, it's a new world. There's a new relationship we're forming between the sector and different public bodies. So we'll be taking those bids in, and we're looking at it all in the round in terms of what is being asked for, if you like. So we've not fixed anything as yet, but it's obviously all the decisions will be coming back on where the money is spent will be coming back to the committee for approval. So it'll be something that will be brought back here. The current budget, the overall budget is something like £2.2 million that's split across the capital and revenue. I think it's million for capital, 1.2 revenue. That's the absolute maximum that goes forward. And I say, as it sets out in the report, the budget for this overall will be set at through the County Council's normal procedures in February. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mark. Also, Glenn, sorry. Do you want to speak? Okay. Okay, sorry. I'll just go back to what I was. I'm not having a good morning this morning. I don't know why. Myself and my vice chairman, Councillor Tom Smith, Mark and Kathy, we're meeting the voluntary sector next week to, should we say, move forward cooperatively together. So we've got that meeting to come next week. Just thought I'd let you know. Councillor Barnfather, sorry. You're hiding around the corner.
Just out of your line of vision, Chair. Just a couple of observations, really. The match funding, I fully understand where Councillor Williamson's coming from, but when you look at match, we're not unique where there's a requirement or an expectation of match funding. I'm just negotiating with the FA at the moment for some financial support in my division. And again, their support is dependent on match funding. That Sport England have a similar requirement. So the County Council are not unique on that. And I think one of the benefits of looking at or having an expectation of some form of match funding is it's very easy to have a wish list. And it's very easy to come to the County Council or indeed any other grant awarding body with your wish list. It actually sorts the wheat from the chaff when there's an expectation on you to actually do more than write a letter asking for some money, where there is an expectation on you to actually do something more constructive, such as raise some of your own funds. And that doesn't mean that you've got to dig into your own pocket. You may not be in a position to write a cheque, but there are various ways in which communities, societies, parish councils can raise other funds. So I actually think it does put some onus and emphasis on the person who's requesting a grant, that they've actually got to put themselves out, or their group or their organisation have got to put themselves out to try and raise some funding. But of course you can balance match funding. So you can go to the FA and they'll say, where's your match funding? Well, you come to the County Council and they'll say, where's your match funding? And you play one off against the other. It's not beyond the wit of man that your match funding for the FA is what the County Council gives you, and your match funding for the County Council is what the FA gives you. So there is more than one way to accumulate match funding. And the role of elected members surely is very much as community champions, not to actually necessarily push these people to offices every time, but it's our role actually to advise and support and assist in match funding, and to be able to signpost these groups and organisations in our division to ways in which they can support their bid. So that's just sort of my observations on match funding. I think some comments from Councillor Guilfoyle about earmarking. I'm always a bit loath to earmark, because if you have a fund where you straight away start to earmark separate percentages of that fund to individual sports, then you're not actually looking at each application on its individual merits. You're saying that, we'll have 50 grand for canoeing in Bassetlaw, for instance, and I'm sure it's very popular. But if you haven't actually got applications for 50 grand's worth that are meritable applications, you then change your rules mid-course, presumably, because you've got some funding left. We have this bit of a debate every year about, we put money into tennis or we'll put money into hockey. But at the end of the day, it's about surely participation in those sports. It's about looking at each application on its merits. It's about saying tennis may well be very popular in a particular area and not popular in another area. So it may be tennis in West Bridgeford, it may be canoeing in Bassetlaw, it may be hockey in my own division where Nottingham Hockey Club are situated. So you look at every application on its merits, and just going a little bit of a mix of the match funding. And on Saturday, the chairman and I were both at Goosedale in my division, where they've just effectively recovered the hockey pitches there. And you go, hockey, that's a bit of an elite sport. It's absolutely not an elite sport, but there are very few facilities in Nottinghamshire. There's Highfields and there is Goosedale in my division, and that is just about it in the greater Nottingham area. It was £150,000 to recover those pitches. We put £30,000 in from our own LIS scheme. Sport England put £70,000 in, but the community, the clubs and the players and the community, including the local parish councils, etc., raised the other £50,000. So to me, that is a classic example of how the scheme should